Good morning, everybody. My name's Dan Lindblade. Welcome to our Candidates for Sheriff Forum for Broward County. I'm the president and CEO of the Greater Fort Lauderdale Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to our candidates today and our guests. Also partnering with us this morning are leaders and members of the Deerfield Beach, Tamarac, North Lauderdale, and Pompano Beach Chambers of Commerce. Our Fort Lauderdale chairman of the board, Bill Feinberg, is on with Allied Kitchen and Bath. We have chamber directors on and elected officials. So welcome everybody this morning. This forum is hosted by our Beach Council, chaired by Bob Kiesler, Downtown Council Chair Ken Ortner, and our Government Affairs Chair Bernadette Norris Weeks. I want everybody to note that this program is being recorded and will be made available on our chamber website following the forum. Should you have any questions, please add to the chat function that you'll see on the bottom of your screen, and we'll make every effort to make sure that we ask those questions. It's now my pleasure to introduce to you our moderator for today, Brandon Beyer, who's been reporting for WSVN Channel 7 since October 2011. For the majority of that time, he's been assigned to cover stories across Broward County. Brandon Beyer came to South Florida from Oklahoma City, where he anchored and reported for 3 years. Prior to that, Brandon worked for a news station in Tallahassee, Florida. Got his start in television working for cable access in a station at Southern Nevada. So Brandon, thank you so much for taking the helm today and moderating our panel. It's all yours.
Thanks so much, Mr. Lindblade, and everyone at the Greater Chamber of Commerce there in Fort Lauderdale for asking me to be a part of the forum. I've lived in this community, as you mentioned, nearly 10 years now since taking the job as a reporter for 7 News. And my wife and family raising our family here, so we're now Dolphins fans, kind of starting to plant some roots here. As a reporter, I've covered many of the issues that we're likely going to be discussing this morning. In the capacity of my job, I've had the fortunate pleasure of meeting several of you in person. It's nice to meet the rest of you virtually. Look forward to the days ahead where we get to do this again in person. But again, on behalf of the Chamber and their partners, thanks to you all for being here this morning. Here's the format of the forum, how we're going to run things this morning. I'm going to read a brief intro for each candidate, and that will lead into an opening question. You'll have 2.5 minutes to answer that question. From there, we're hoping to be able to take some questions from members of the various chambers who are watching this remotely. They'll be able to ask you individually, specifically, some of the things they're hoping to see if you were to be elected sheriff. So we'll be able to ask those questions to you directly. I also have a list of questions we can get to if, as far as the current events go, if need be. If one candidate is singled out by someone else, we're going to give that person a chance to respond. They'll have 1 minute to respond to that particular issue. So we're going to start. Mr. H. Wayne Clark, you are first. Read a brief intro about your career, and then we'll get into your opening question. Mr. Clark is a trial attorney with 15 years of legal experience in our local, state, and federal legal systems, a veteran of the U.S. Army. Mr. Clark has served our country as airborne engineer and construction engineer. He also served 2 years as staff attorney for the Honorable Robert Rosenberg and the Honorable Victor Tobin. That's in the 17th Judicial Court District. Mr. Clark, having never served as a law enforcement officer before, you're counting on using your business and military experience to lead BSO. What critical decisions are you prepared to make while instilling your priorities if you're elected?
Thank you, Brandon, and thank you, Dan, as well as members of the forum and the chamber for hosting this event tonight. I have military experience, I have legal experience, and I have business experience. One thing I know that I've seen over the past 15 months of campaigning throughout this county and living in this county for the past 20 years is that BSO is riddled with politics. Politics has led BSO down a very slippery slope into making Broward County unsafe. If you are a resident, a visitor of Broward County, or you have anything to do with Broward County, you need to understand BSO is way more than law enforcement. BSO touches every aspect of Broward County, from the seaport to the airport, to the Department of Detention, which is the jails, to law enforcement, fire, EMS, dispatch, as well as mental health and community programs. As the leader of BSO, I believe that the leader should lead all parts of the agency and not just focus on one. I have the experience in the legal arena, the military, as well as the business to be able to handle all those aspects. One of my assets is I know what I know, and I'm really good at knowing what I don't know. So I have secured around me a great group of individuals who will help me lead the agency in the right direction. I know I have to have an extremely qualified undersheriff. I'm also going to have an extremely qualified fire chief under me to help guide the agency. It's time to take the politics away and make Broward County safe. You know, one of the things I want to focus on is that political nature of BSO. It seems like that BSO has turned into a political lobbying organization as opposed to a public safety agency. And it needs to be run differently. We're here to serve the citizens of Broward County and make the public safer, not bring politics into the community. If you notice, crime rate in Broward County is up. We almost have nearly as many homicides in 2020 as we did in 2019. We're less safe today than we were a year ago, and we need to change that. So I'm running to make sure I can run all of BSO and not just one particular aspect of it. So anyone that questions my ability regarding law enforcement, I have that military background. I have that military training. I also have the legal aspect of it. I promise you, I know more about legal analysis and the legal arena than any member of any candidate on this call today. And I task anybody to try to challenge that aspect of it. So Brandon, it's time for a change. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to mention, I forgot to mention in the intro, the order of the opening statements in that first question, that was done randomly. There's no significance to the order here. And that we'll save if someone is singled out and mentioned, we're going to save that for the question and answer part. Next up is Casimiro Navarro. Mr. Navarro, good morning. And also I see Al Pollock has joined us here. So everyone's here. Good to see you, Mr. Pollock. And we'll keep moving right along here. Mr. Navarro served as a law enforcement officer for more than 35 years and retired from the Broward Sheriff's Office in June. He's an Army veteran who also served as a reserve officer in Texas before returning to Florida, where he also worked for the Miami Springs Police Department early on in his career. Mr. Navarro, having worked for decades with BSO, what are the three main changes you'd like to instill if you're elected?
There we go. I'm sort of novice with these mute buttons. Well, Brandon, one of the first things that has to happen is that the employees of the agency have to feel like they are backed. That the administration will back them, even when mistakes are made, and not be thrown under the bus like the president administration has done, and even some of the previous administrations have done. We're all humans and we all make mistakes. And sometimes you need to have a little compassion. I mean, obviously, depending if it's a criminal act, then you act appropriately, but you have to have people's back. My next thing that I would do is obviously try to work a better relationship with the community. The community at this point doesn't trust the employees, and not just the policemen, but also the firemen, the 911 operators, the CPS workers. I remember not too long ago, with all this pandemic thing, I was at a Publix, and Publix obviously works with first responders, and they let us in a couple of minutes early. When we came out, the people that had been waiting started cussing out. I mean, I'm used to it. I'm a policeman, but when they started cussing out and started, belittling or berating the firemen were like, "Oh my God, they're saying that to me." Well, that's the problem that's happening right now, because the public doesn't trust anybody. Thirdly, I would definitely try to revamp our communication systems. Our communication systems has got to be, it's not good. Not only because the county took over the dispatch, but also with the equipment that's presented. Our present sheriff went out and spent almost $2.25 million on rifles, when in essence, with a sheriff, no offense, but I think that money should have been better allocated to improve our communication system by even putting radios in the cars. The policemen or the deputies don't have radios in their police cars. They only have the radios on their belts, and those fail. So those would be my three top priorities.
Thank you, Mr. Navarro. I should also mention Mr. Scott Israel was scheduled to join us today. Let us know a little more than an hour ago that he had an unavoidable doctor's appointment, so wish him well. He is unable to join us this morning. Up next, Sheriff Gregory Tony. Sheriff, good morning. Sheriff Tony was sworn in to lead the Broward Sheriff's Office in January of 2019. He began his law enforcement career with the Coral Springs Police Department in 2005, rose to the rank of sergeant before leaving Coral Springs PD in 2016 to run a private firm. Mr. Tony, you focused your campaign on looking towards the future. What three accomplishments of your current tenure do you plan to take from and build upon if you're reelected?
Thank you, Brandon. Good to see you again. Do I have an opportunity to rebuttal some of the comments that was made before addressing
your
your
next,
question?
so I think we were going to kind of do it a different way, but you're certainly next.
Okay.
So the floor is yours.
Thank you. I just want to make sure I'm playing by the rules. Just really quickly to Mr. Navarro's comments and related to the current administration, myself throwing members under the bus. I want to be clear about what he's talking about. What he's interpreting is accountability. I have held this agency and the men and women under my command to the highest level of accountability. We can't afford to have law enforcement officers who go out into the field and violate the public's trust through excessive force, abuse, or even violating the laws themselves. And so our members are afforded their due process that is provided to them under Chapter 112. They go through their Bill of Rights. And then at the end of that, through that protocol, I have the final determination as to what disciplinary action will happen. And I will not hesitate to hold people accountable, whether it be suspensions or up to termination. To the second allegation made related to the $2.5 million that has been spent towards rifles. That's not an exact number. He's a little off, but his point is we shouldn't have spent the money there. Going back to 1998, during the Police Executive Research Commission, the International Chiefs of Police, it has been clearly stated that law enforcement officers in the current climate where AK-47s are out in the field, people are running into our schools with rifles and shooting and slaughtering kids all across America, that we must have the necessary tools to be able to stop those threats and have an advantageous approach to being successful when we do it. That means that law enforcement need rifles in the field. This organization, through IUPA and every other union group, have cried for rifles for years, going back almost a decade, and they were not afforded it to them. So I reallocated the funds to make sure they have it, and that recommendation was also within the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Commission, where a multitude of sheriffs and law enforcement officers with much more tenure and time had stated that it was appalling that we didn't have that equipment. So that's my rebuttal there. In terms of your specific question about accomplishments, some of the core things we've done that came into the organization in this administration, we've advanced the active shooter response protocols, changed policies, and invested millions of dollars into technologies and equipment to make sure we safeguard the public. Brandon, I know you personally have visited our real-time crime center, which is a state-of-the-art facility that could have been established a decade ago. In addition to that, we've also invested in personnel by promoting the most diverse command staff in 105 years. This agency has been now being led by 500 years of institutional knowledge and experience, and that's why we're succeeding.
Okay, Sheriff, thank you so much. Time is up. Mr. Charles Whatley is next. Mr. Whatley's lived here in Broward County for over 45 years. Marine Corps veteran. He began his law enforcement career after completing his military service. Thank you for that, by the way, sir. For a combined 28 years, he served as a law enforcement officer with the City of Oakland Park, and then also with the Broward Sheriff's Office. Mr. Whatley, you stated that if elected to the Sheriff of Broward County, you'll start by overhauling BSO's civil citation program for juvenile justice. How do you plan to accomplish something like this, and how does the current program fall short, in your opinion?
Well, first of all, Broward County has their own civil citation program as compared to the one under the Florida legislature. The one in the Florida legislature was used to help juveniles that have behavioral issues. And if they committed a minor infraction of the law, let's say like setting off an alarm or trespassing or something else like that, instead of in the past of them going to jail and the juvenile justice system, they'd be given a citation. But what Broward County did, they wanted to lower the crime rate in order to receive $53 million in grant money. So what Broward County did is they added crimes to the list as suggested by the Florida legislature. So Broward County, this is prior to Sheriff Tony, added crimes such as sexual assault, bullying, threats. Prior to MSD, you didn't see a juvenile being arrested on the news for making a threat at a school. It was after MSD occurred that you saw it like every other week. A student made a threat to do something to a school, because now they decided, we didn't take enough action, and that's why MSD happened. It was documented that Nicholas Cruz made a video to threaten that school, and he told other people. But what they did was, under that program, was kept everything under the blanket and tried to handle it within the school system itself, and thus that's how that situation occurred. So that's why we change it. When you don't hold people accountable at a young age, it can cost you lives. You can't take the chance of that. So that's the biggest issue with the civil citation program.
Okay, Mr. Whatley, thank you. Up next, Mr. Al Pollock. Mr. Pollock joined the Broward Sheriff's Office in 1977 after serving with the U.S. Marine Corps. Thank you for your service, sir. Mr. Pollock touts the relationships he's built within our community over the past 4 decades within BSO. He moved into the command staff positions after serving as an assistant to the sheriff, narcotics detective, and sergeant, among other roles with the department. Mr. Pollock, you retired from Broward Sheriff's Office, displeased with its direction and cited divisiveness in the department. What are your plans for bridging that perceived mistrust within the department and in our community?
Brian, good morning to you. One of the first things that I would do is I would meet with the deputies, and I will also meet with the command staff and start giving them my vision and my statement as we are moving forward, within the Broward Sheriff's Office. Also, one of the problems with the Sheriff's Office at the moment is with the morale. So I will really, truly build on the morale and change that image. Also, I will get more involved with the community involvement. That's where we have to build that trust. That we've lost it, and community's not going to come to us. I feel as though we have to go to them, to make those changes, to win them back over. And it's an easy fix. All we have to do is interact more, get out of our vehicles more, be more involved with community activities and functions to show them that we're there for them. I will also build and enhance on our youth programs within the agency, our community, our Explore program, our firefighters programs. There are so many good programs that BSO have that we have to take advantage of. Also our PAL, moving forward. Those are some of the things that I would bring forth, to build that trust and that relationship back. Because we was always known in the past for having those type of relationships with Broward County, residents and our youth.
Thank you, Mr. Pollock. Mr. Willie Jones is next. Mr. Jones, good morning. Mr. Jones has dedicated the better part of 40 years to serving his community in various law enforcement capacities. He started with the Metro-Dade Department of Corrections, also served as a police officer with the City of Fort Lauderdale Police Department, as a consultant with Federal Housing Authority, and as a deputy with the Broward County Sheriff's Office, later promoted to supervisor there. Mr. Jones, if elected sheriff, you've run on the platform of promising to bring best practices for policing that align with the 21st century. What specific philosophy will you bring for hiring and training deputies in the department?
Hiring and training deputies, as it's done now, is done with the old policies, the old way of hiring. We're talking about the polygraph, the psychological. The new practices says, let's use explicit and implicit racial bias testing. We must do that at the front door. We must begin to identify what's creating the problem. One of the issues that we're having is recruiting. And the community is asking for police officers to look like us, to work in our communities. One of the things we're going to bring in is that we want to do a dual enrollment in high school with juniors, seniors, sophomores, and freshmen. This will allow us to have the students learn about law enforcement while they're in school. Once they complete it, they'll have their 11 credit hours. So then after turning 18, they can actually sit for the state test. And that's also with firefighters. This is how we reconnect with our community, because now we have people that has grown up, been educated in the community, and they have a vested interest. We're not talking about going to the Northeast, the Southwest, and bringing people in just for the money. They have a vested interest in seeing this community grow. Because when we talk about trust, one of the pillars says the people of the community will not trust us if they don't think we're legitimate enough that's taking care of them. The 20th century model that was used was the broken window model, and that was arresting people for minor infractions. We have become known as an occupying force in our communities, and we stopped protecting and serving the most vulnerable people of our communities, which are our senior citizens and our children. So we must come back and start doing what the oath that we took. The oath says, we the people, we supposed to be serving the people, not the people serving our agency. So one of the things we're talking about is changing the hiring process, changing the training process, changing how we discipline, change how we promote and put people into positions. We have overlooked so many talented people because, and law enforcement personnel know this, if you don't kiss the ring, if you don't bow down to the sheriff, the leaders, you don't get those choice assignments. You're put on the back burner. So we have a lot of people that want to do the right things, but because of the political rhetoric, because of the political and special interest, the money, our people inside don't do the right thing. Thank you.
Yes, sir, Mr. Jones, thank you. Finally, this morning, Andrew Smalling. Mr. Smalling served in the Marine Corps for 10 years. Thank you for your service, sir. Received an honorable discharge after attaining the rank of major there. In 1991, he joined the Broward Sheriff's Office, served for 20 years with the department, rose to the rank of District Chief for the City of Lauderdale Lakes, retired from BSO back in 2011, acting as a major supervising as the acting major supervising multiple cities there in the department. Shortly after leaving BSO, he was appointed Chief of Police in the City of Lauderhill, served there until 2015, currently an Associate Dean and an Assistant Professor at Broward's College Institute for Public Safety. Mr. Smalling, you have said that there is currently a, quote, warrior mentality in policing. How would you instill training to curb that sort of mentality?
Well, good morning, Brandon. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to the different chambers for having this forum. Yes, the warrior mentality is something that has been procured and continues to be instilled in our policing, and it starts in the police academy. I think that we have to start there. As a matter of fact, I see it every day because I'm out there at the academy. I'm on the degree seeking side, but I'm actually located where the actual police academy is located. And, you know, it starts with that military training. It's unusual coming from somebody who spent a career in the military to say that we probably need less military training, but that boot camp style of training, you know, yes sir, yes sir, no sir, doing push-ups, it's a form of discipline, but it also instills that mentality, that military mentality. I think we probably need to soften that up. So it starts there. We need more communications, interaction, interactive communication, implicit bias training. We talked about that type of training before, but I think it all starts at the academy. And that's the recruit phase. When we talk about officers that are already on the force, one of the programs that BSO used to have when I was there, and I thought it was very effective, was something called verbal judo. And that's a little bit about how do you use your communication skills, your voice, your mannerism to try to defuse and de-escalate certain incidents. So instead of reaching for weapons, you use a very effective weapon that you have, which is your voice, your demeanor, your stature, to try to bring situations down. So I think things like that would help to diffuse that type of mentality. And it starts with training. It's a fine balance because you have to still be able to take action, use force when it's necessary, because we do have people that, you know, resist or just don't want to comply. So we have to know when to do that. So it's a balance, and you know, emotional intelligence is necessary with our officers, with our deputies, to be able to know when to flip that switch back and forth. So some of those things, and a number of other programs that I've thought about to try to decrease that warrior mentality when we talk about that type of mentality in our policing.
Mr. Smalley, thank you. So that concludes our opening statements. We'll now get into the questions. We're going to follow that that same order of rundown that we had. So it's back to you, Mr. Clark, to start things off. One of the most tragic, events that's happened in recent months was, of course, the killing of Mr. George Floyd, which is, we saw the protesting, we saw a call for a reform in policing. And one of the arguments that has been made, Mr. Clark, again, we're starting here with you, is that, are there circumstances where, maybe a police officer is called to a situation that might be suited, for a social worker or another type of professional? Is that something you see possible, and how do you go about implementing something like that?
Well, look, there's always time to change, right? We need to try to get better every day as humans and as the agency. When someone calls 911 for an emergency, that's the right for, if it's law enforcement, fire, EMS, that's the individuals that need to go. But I do see some change to where there's a homicide, the victim's family is there, maybe bring grief counseling in, counselors in to speak to the family as opposed to law enforcement. There are areas where we can bring in mental health individuals to help, the scene and help the area. But when it comes to investigating the crimes, it comes to dealing with the emergencies. Let's let our first responders do that. There's certainly a place for mental health. There's certainly a place for other types of counselors. There are programs in the United States, in Oregon, for instance, that has a program where they have a team that goes out and deals with, drug addicts and things like that. Those are great programs to look at. And I certainly am willing to put into some kind of test model here in Broward County. But the citizens need to know, if there's an emergency, you're going to have a qualified law enforcement, fire, EMS, whatever it calls for, individual arrive at the scene to take care of it. One aspect you can look at is having more community service aides for minor fender benders. You don't always need a law enforcement officer to respond to a simple fender bender. Things like that can be implemented. We certainly looked at the different areas that VSO covers, the different jurisdictions, the regionalization of VSO, and how it responds throughout the county. So there are programs that are out there in the country that I'm willing to explore and look at. But I need the county to know, and the citizens of the county to know, if there's an emergency, the right first responders are going to respond. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Navarro, same question to you. And I know I've read a quote where you're reported saying, better mental health care is available to the inmates in the jail. But do you see a scenario where, as people look to reform police work and evolve, where there might be a situation where an officer isn't the correct person to send to a scene, or how do you view that line of police work?
Brandon, being somebody that just recently came off of off the road, I would say it's sort of dangerous to send people that don't know how to deal with a situation. A mental health issue could become a life-threatening issue at the drop of a hat. Additionally, I can understand sending somebody to follow up maybe what the policeman would do, but the policeman or law enforcement needs to respond first, make an assessment of what's going on, because sometimes what they're telling you on the phone isn't exactly what's happening. And what happens is now you're going to send somebody in there who's not armed, who's not prepared to deal with, possibly a violent individual. And sometimes, unfortunately, our mental health people do become violent. And you gotta have us there, make an assessment. Based on that assessment, we can call the additional resources. I can't see a social worker standing by waiting for a phone call that, okay, there's somebody that needs social services, because it doesn't work that way. Normally, that's not what the issue is. The issue is somebody's being violent, somebody's being non-compliant. I will agree with Mr. Clark on the issue that with minor things like a traffic accident or something like that, yes, send in your CSA or your community service aides or your public service aides to handle those minor things. However, just without seeing what's going on first, just randomly sending somebody in who's not prepared to deal with a violent situation, I would disagree with that. That's it. Thank you.
And thank you, sir. Sheriff, to you now, you're in a unique situation in that you were, in charge of the department as some of these things really had to change on the fly. Have you, in the months that this has unfolded, have you seen a change in a way to respond to various calls that might help things, de-escalate? And what is your take in light of all that's come out recently?
No, I think I'm in a unique situation in that we've been forward thinking in this administration and kind of anticipating what changes need to take place before the George Floyd murder. Specifically, when you're talking about the mental health care issue that really is involved in many of the calls for services that we get. One of the things we did last year upon accepting command was to evaluate how many of our deputies are actually certified under CIT or crisis intervention training. It's roughly a 40-hour block that helps provide our men and women with another tool to be able to assess people who may suffer from mental health care and not necessarily are intent for violence or crimes. Our goal this year is to make sure that we continue to fund and be the first agency in the state of Florida where every single one of our law enforcement personnel will be certified under crisis intervention training. But we also explored opportunities for partnerships with the Department of Justice and Homeland Security. We received a $500,000 grant affording us an opportunity to hire 2 mental health care professionals to help us design out our own internal training and be able to use these experts to help guide us on what things we can do when we are out in the field. That's a very significant thing. We've never done that in the agency, and I'm excited to see how much progress we get from there. But last year, we also partnered up with something we have in-house, our Sheriff's Foundation. They do a great job supporting us as an agency, and we launched a mental health care summit that had an enormous response. Over 800 plus people attended. We had subject matter experts that helped train both first responders and the civilians. We have another one coming up this year. To a certain degree with what Mr. Clark said, as well as Mr. Navarro, there's challenges there, and that we have to ensure that we don't expose civilians, mental health care professionals, et cetera, to a potential violent call. And so some of the things we have done as an example is how we handle our CPIS investigation, Child Protective Investigative Services under my command. Before we send those investigators out, we always send a law enforcement first to assess, evaluate, make sure the scene is safe before they get out and to conduct their investigations. It would be a similar practice here if we start to deploy mental health care professionals out into the community.
Thank you, Sheriff.
I got a rebuttal to that.
You've got a minute.
Okay. Well, first of all, he talked about, Broward Sheriff's Office being the top and so forth, and seeing that everybody, ensuring that everybody is certified in CIT or crisis intervention training. This started back in Lamberti. We actually put so many deputies through there. It's almost like it's separate academy class. And Al Pollock knows this, Willie Jones knows this, and Smalley. This didn't start with Tony. And as far as CPIS is concerned, that has been done since the 90s. When CPIS responds to a home, the Broward Sheriff's Office, even when I was at Oakland Park, has always sent the deputy. This isn't something that came up new with Tony, but he'll try to take credit for it. And this is what he's perfect at doing, taking credit for things that have already been done by past administrations. Thank you.
Mr. Whatley, while I've got you there, on you're next on this, and mental health is one of the top lists on your website. You mentioned, and so mental health is one of your top issues. Do you see a situation where a call out might maybe a different than a police officer responds to a type of call? Is it, or a social worker? Is there ever an appropriate situation to that in your eyes?
I agree with what Wayne Clark was stipulating, grief counselors and so forth, but to go to an initial call, a lot of times it's not clear on dispatch what they're coming to. It could be a person talking loudly in the house, and the deputy shows up and just tries to knock on the door and talk to the person, and the deputy's attacked. That's happened many times in the past. So I would never, on any police service type call, send a social worker to themselves. In agencies that have tried to do that in the past, number one, it has happened where the social worker has been injured, and other crimes have gone up over 100%, including violent crimes, because they didn't send law enforcement services. So that's where I talk about it, is maybe grieving. My big thing with with mental health is providing more mental health for the employees that work at the sheriff's office. They deal with so many situations, and they try to be too macho and hold things in, and this affects them. This is why you have a high rate of suicides among law enforcement and fire personnel. So I will impose more, not training, just training, but more mental health treatment for the employees themselves. That way they can keep that focus. Things don't build up internally within their system, and they end up getting themselves in a bind. You know, things build up. It only takes one time for a deputy to have a bad day, and his whole career is ruined because he held things internally too long without receiving the proper help. So my key is providing more mental health for the employees, and they would all have to participate, especially if they're on the road.
Mr. Pollock, you're next, and then Mr. Jones, followed by Mr. Smalling, and we'll move on to the next question. But you've heard the question several times now, Mr. Pollock. Are there any circumstances in your eyes where someone other than a police officer responding is appropriate?
Yes, Brian. Again, just like the other panelists, we have to be very careful on sending social workers, to certain calls. A lot of times when communications receive these calls, they don't truly have all the facts sometimes. But there is a place for the social workers or the mental health professional to assist us. And that's what follow-ups are. Once we get there and we determine that we're not needed, then they can take it over, from there. Once we render, the scene safe enough, that they can handle. And they can also, do follow-up, investigations where we don't have to respond to a lot of times. There's a lot of juvenile type calls that we can have them handle, from a school situation, that we don't have to respond to. So there is a need and there's a place, but also we have to have the right funding in place, to implement those types of programs. But it can be done and it should be done, moving forward.
Mr. Jones, you're next.
Yeah, Brian, that's part of what's been happening with the law enforcement industry. The law enforcement industry has always been a single source service provider, and the community has always relied on us to give them the answers. The 21st century model says you need to bring all of your stakeholders to the table, all the expertise to the table to address the issues that's within the community. One of the things that we're talking about doing is putting a 24/7 mental health response unit. And this is having a deputy ride in North, Central, and South with a team of social workers, mental health providers on call at all times. So the only response that the deputy has on those calls is to make sure the social service staff, the mental health personnel are safe. He or she will not interfere with what's going on. That's on the road side. On the jail side, the detention side, we're talking about at the time of the booking process, when people come in, we want to have a mental health person there to do a quick evaluation to determine how we house this individual, or do we house them in the jail at all? They may need to go out to another facility to be taken care of. This is what we're talking about doing with mental health, with providing to the community. And that's all part of rebranding the new business model of policing for the 21st century, bringing our stakeholders. See, there's one entity, one organization that has yet come to the table with law enforcement, and that's the National Institute of Mental Health. These are people that went to school, they served all their lives dealing with mental health issues. We need to get them to the table for their expertise in designing mental health responses to the community. Also at the Stockade, we want to put for the homeless a facility there where everybody comes to a one-stop there And it doesn't cost the county any more money because the facility is already there. We just need to bring our stakeholders and everybody from the community to the table to put their services there so we can address a whole lot of issues at one time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Mr. Smalling, and then we'll move on.
All right. This comes as a result of the whole defunding the police movement. I think that this has been the case where police officers and deputy sheriffs have had to handle more calls than they really are prepared for. One of my colleagues, I think it was back in 2018, he was the chief of police in Dallas, wrote an article and said that the police have taken on too much. And what has happened, and it's because of budget cuts and state governments, federal governments, whatever, getting out of different social services and leaving it there because they're no longer involved in it. Mental health, truancy, youth offenders, we could go on and on. And it's always fell to the police to pick those things up because we're the only 24/7 available agency to do that. So because of something that was initiated by our government, started really by our government, where they took funds away from these different sources to do mental health counseling, to do homeless work, outreach, it's fell on the police. So I think what's going to have to happen is that we need to be able to do some legislation so we can get some of these organizations back on track to do those specific things. I agree with my colleagues that, you don't want to necessarily send a police officer or a social worker into a situation that requires a police officer and you don't know it. But definitely the follow-up and the organization, when we talk about defunding the police, that's what they're saying, that take some money from the police budget and put it towards these other social services that used to exist.
Thank you, Mr. Smalley. We've had two tragic mass shootings here in the last few years here in Broward County. Both times the 911 towers, the radio communication played an unfortunate role in both. Mr. Clark, it's your turn at this point. There's been talk of a tower. Ideally, they want to build it somewhere in Hollywood. I know they're getting some resistance in that regard, but there's been talk of a tower that could help improve that issue. How would you, Mr. Clark, lead in that arena?
Well, originally, BSO was in charge of communications. It went back to the county commission, and it's been like that. There's some discrepancy as to how and why it did that. BSO has $1 billion budget. BSO has enough resources to handle communications. It has to fix the communications problem. We are in 2020. There are no reasons whatsoever that we don't have an adequate communication system. Every time something massive happens in Broward County, the current system crashes. And you have to have the officers, the deputies, fire, EMS, whoever's responding, are actually calling each other on their cell phones to be able to talk and communicate. That's unacceptable. I believe that the sheriff should take back the communications. The 911 aspect of it is what we are, first responders. And as a first responder, we need to have the ability to control that. There's no reason that the county commission should play politics with communications in Broward County. There is talk of the tower going in Hollywood. I believe was talked at one time of the Cirque Hotel. That's a private hotel. I assume there were some negotiations with regarding to renting tower space there. Communications is way too important to leave it up to politics, and we need a leader to step up, allocate the proper part of the budget for it, and take care of the communications aspect, because without proper communications, the entire county of Broward, all the citizens, all the visitors, everyone that comes to the county is less safe. And so we need to be able to take that as first responders and have the ability to know that we have proper communications there, that we're going to be able to communicate with one another, that we're going to be able to call for backup if we need it, be able to call for additional resources if we need it. And it's a regionalization thing also. we have, 17 contracts or so, or 17 other jurisdictions. My time is up, but I'll expound on it a little later when you give me another question. Thank you.
I'd like to answer on that also.
We're going to go in order here. We're going to go to Mr. Whatley. You are after the sheriff, but next is Mr. Navarro. How would you get the radio system working better? To you, Mr. Navarro, if you can hear us.
I got it. I'm still learning this thing.
No worries.
Brandon, it's like I said in the beginning, one of my first three things that I said I would change would be that situation with the communication system. The sheriff once again said something about the rifles and all these. Well, before he started handing out all these rifles, there were deputies that already had rifles. They had their own rifles. We qualified. We used our own. We had our own equipment, and those that wanted to use it or wanted to have a rifle had them because we purchased our own. There's people out there right now that they may have rifles that scares me. So once again, there are these funds that are being allocated to different types of equipment that, I mean, honestly, I'll tell you right now, I see all these new rookies. The first thing they do is pull out a rifle, and a rifle is when you want to reach out and touch somebody. Unfortunately, when you get into a gun battle or you get into something, it's usually pretty much up close and personal, where a rifle is not something that you need. So take away all this money that he's using for other things and revamp that communication system. I was there when the airport situation happened. You couldn't talk to anybody. You keyed the mic and all you got was a tone. Unfortunately, when the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas situation happened, I was also working, and the whole system went down because you keyed the mic and all you got was a great big tone. You can't do that. You need to put your money where your mouth is and put it in the right place. That's basically my response to that.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Sheriff, you're next, and we got a specific question in regards to you. You can touch on as you move into the radio system, but it comes from someone who's viewing here. How can private schools be implemented with the real-time crime center that we mentioned earlier, and how much would that cost? And then as you move on from that, talk about the radios and your concerns there.
Yes, sir. As far as the real-time crime center goes, we already procured the equipment, technology, personnel to handle and manage that. We have not put a price point, nor shall we put a price point on partnering up with our private schools. It's a matter of signing a mutual aid agreement and allowing our team to go in and assess and get the access needed for camera systems. But in short, that is a system that is free, not just for schools, but we've also expanded it to house of worships and business entities. So for that aspect, it's free. In terms of the issues that we have been dealing with in the county and with the communication systems, I think for the most part, you're going to hear consistent concern here. Wayne started it off correct. The history behind this system is that it is no longer exclusively managed by the sheriff's office. What's happened is the responsibilities for dispatching has been bifurcated under two different elements. The first, operational. The operational side is handled by our men and women in dispatch, meaning we take the calls for services, we deploy personnel and assets out to scenes based on what the needs are. However, the second component where the county is now responsible for is the technology, procuring the necessary software, purchasing the necessary state-of-the-art computers, et cetera, to be able to get that out, as well as the issues with the towers. And so the moment that this organization under predecessors elected that this was not a priority for the sheriff's office to hold responsible for, I think was catastrophic. It is the most fundamental and most important tool that we have on our belt is our radios. And what I will tell you is what we've done, having examined the MSD reports and understanding what the issues were, was to take responsibility of what we can handle from an operational standpoint. We recognize the failures in incident command. We rectify those, put new policies in place and new training. We created a tactical alert protocol to ensure that the necessary person would be deployed. And we procured the new radio systems that were essential. We just had a full evaluation a few days ago where the accreditation body came through, examined what we did, and recommended we get back to full accreditation. I think that speaks volumes to the accomplishments we've had.
Thank you, Sheriff. I know Mr. Whatley, you were anxious. Your turn.
Yeah, dealing with the issue, another problem with just with the towers, but in the past, and this still continues, they tried to merge an old system with a new system instead of just replacing the entire system. So like I said before, that's like trying to take a 20-year-old computer and merge it with a 2020 computer. And what happens is you have systematic failures because you're trying to save money. And that's what has happened with the Broward Sheriff's Office. When they have these issues like this, they'll spend $750,000 on propaganda. Look at me, look at me. But when it comes to replacing equipment properly, that's where they put things off. They're busy making videos of themselves, promoting themselves, the leaders currently and in the past, instead of taking care of the employees and the equipment. They'll buy unnecessary equipment and then brag about it, but not do the necessary changes to improve the efficiency of the Broward Sheriff's Office.
Mr. Pollock, radio towers, how do we get them working better?
Brandon, first of all, this is something that didn't happen overnight. This goes back many, many years. You just have to have a sheriff that's committed to taking it over. I don't think the county should be in that position to run it. We're first responders. I think that we should be handling it. It's something that we have to make a priority. Dade County, the largest county in the state, don't have that problem. Palm Beach County don't have that problem. Out of 67 counties, Broward being the second largest population-wise, we have a problem. This problem goes back many, many sheriffs, but you have to have a sheriff to step up and take ownership of it and make sure that the county follows through with it. And also, you got to talk to the cities. If this is where the towers and things are going, they have to know that this is so important. This is a life-saving device that we need so desperately. I mean, this just didn't start. This has been going on for a number of years and a number of decades. I can go back 10 years and we had this problem. I can go back 6 years, we had this problem where deputies in Weston couldn't even communicate to communication. And there was no incident. They just can't communicate. So we have to work with the counties and the cities to bring about a solution, but we got to do it fast because we're talking about life saving here. When people dial 911, they're calling for help. And we shouldn't have that communication problem or breakdown problem. It's going to be an ongoing problem until the leaders get together and fix it. But it needs to be fixed. We can sit here and we can be talking about it for the next 5 years. The problem still exists today where deputies can't communicate with each other or could communicate with cities. In the 21st century, we should be talking to everybody in this county. It should not be a situation where we can't communicate and we're standing next door. I mean, standing next to each other. So as a sheriff, we got to put that as a priority and continue to fight that battle each and every day. Brandon.
Mr. Jones, you're next.
Yes.
Brandon, is there time for a rebuttal?
1 minute, go.
I don't need that long because I don't think Mr. Pollock intentionally implied that I wasn't doing something, but I want to make sure it's clear. I have been working with the county administrator, Ms. Henry, for months on resolutions to help meet the challenges between operation and technology. And I want to be clear as to the conversations I've had with her, and she understands this, that the Broward Sheriff's Office is prepared to take over the system when she's ready to relinquish it. And in order to take it over, we would have to take this over with the necessary funds to mitigate the things that we would find as a sheriff's office essential for us to be able to perform. And so those discussions are ongoing. I know Mr. Pollock was not intentional in his comment, but I am the sheriff and that needs to be said.
Brian, this was no shot at Greg Tony, right? It's just, this happened before you.
We got to move on to Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones, what is your take on the current state of our radio system and under your leadership, how would you move forward with it?
Well, Greg, I was in a unique position when they were talking about regionalizing this here. I was actually the supervisor in Pompano that was involved in the weekly conversations. And during those conversations, I stated, along with my fellow sergeant, that we were not ready for this move. The technology and the training had not been matched up properly. They were on the fast track. We had policing radio systems all over the county that we had a mutual aid channel that we can go to and talk about any incident that was going on. That was not an issue with communication because that was already worked out with the many municipalities. What the problem was, You take the current staff and brought in new software, and the new software was not properly trained. So when we start talking about the radio tower, that is an infrastructure. That's just a minute problem. The problem is training and bringing in the proper experts. We did not bring in the experts to tell us and show us how to develop and implement this here. Thus, we're still a single source service provider. We have all the answers. We need to get out of I am the king of the hill and bring in those stakeholders, develop those partnerships, bring them in and listen to the experts, and then make the appropriate situation a call on it. We got to stop putting money over safety, not only for the deputies, but for the residents of Broward County. This is more about saving lives, providing and protecting and serving the people than saving dollars.
Mr. Smalling, your ideas.
Well, this is a leadership challenge. It's not only a leadership challenge, it's a political leadership challenge. When I was part of the Broward Chiefs Association, this is something that we talked about at probably every meeting, this communication system. And there's two parts that are involved here, actually three parts now, because you talk about the towers, and the towers are placed in individual cities. It's up to that city government to give us permission or give the county permission to even install those things. So that's a political issue that has to be overcome. Recently, Tamarac, Hollywood, those cities went through that. The second part of it is just what Greg Tony was talking about, with the sheriff's office having to bifurcate the whole 911 system, where it used to be all under the sheriff's office. Unfortunately, our predecessors, his predecessors, did not do quality technology, did not bring up to date the 911 communication system, which is being done now. But unfortunately, now we've got part of it with the county, part of it with the sheriff's office. So until we can combine all those things, and that's why I say it's a leadership challenge, and politically, because everybody's got their own thing going on. Plantation has got their own system. Coral Springs has got their own system, and they're not gonna give them up. So we'll never get truly regionalized communication. So we're just gonna have to do the best with what we've got. I think the technology is coming on board, I believe in the next month or so. There's gonna be new technology coming on board that the county is purchasing. And we just have to work with them and make sure that our dispatchers are up to date and have the good training and don't get COVID and are able to dispatch proficiently for our county.
Thank you, Mr. Smalling. Getting some good questions in now from our viewers. I want to kind of combine two so we can cover as much ground as possible. You mentioned COVID, Mr. Smalling, and we're back to the top of the list now with Mr. Clark. But is there a fear that under this current pandemic, we could see a rise in crime? And then as far as COVID-19, we have these mask mandates in order that people are being asked to follow. How do you enforce that? And how do you specifically do that with other municipalities? So you say, I live in Hollywood, we have our own police department here. How do you work together to protect people? Mr. Clark, you're up.
Thank you, Brandon. There's no doubt, ever since COVID has hit and 2020's hit, crime in Broward County is up. If you look at the crime statistics, homicides are up, crimes against persons are up, crimes against property are up, and we need to address that. One of the things with COVID is also you've had a problem because when it first hit, you had people not calling 911, not reaching out for EMS because they were afraid that the first responders may have COVID because there were issues with improper PPE, whether we had it, whether we didn't have it. I don't want to get into that debate, but, Al Pollock and I teamed up, Democrat, Republican, we teamed up to make sure that if BSO didn't have enough, we could help give some. So we donated some. And, whether they had enough or not, it doesn't matter. Having too much is a good thing. Not having enough is a bad thing. So you had people in the community not calling 911, not calling EMS because they were afraid the first responders may have it. They were afraid of being transported somewhere where they may have it. So you had issues with COVID dealing with issues like that. You've also had issues with the recent large block parties that the current administration has implemented new changes and new ways in cracking down on those. You had the mayor of the county issuing that curfew to try to crack down on those. I believe there were something like 10 homicides occurred in those areas prior to that crackdown. You know, it should have been something that was cracked down to prior to. With regard to enforcing, you know, the mask orders, you know, private businesses such as Publix, Walmart, companies like that, you know, they have those in place. You know, I as sheriff wouldn't send my deputies into private business to go and try to force people to wear masks or not. That's something that, you know, the individual companies have the right to do, just like not wearing shirts, not wearing shoes. With regard to working with other agencies in the county, absolutely, we need to do a better job at working with the other departments throughout the county to make sure we have a unified stance on things.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Mr. Navarro, policing in a pandemic, the COVID-19 crisis that's upon us and could be for some time now. How does that change police work in your eyes? And a second half of that question is you know, working with other municipalities where, you know, there's a police department. How would that work under your leadership?
There we go. Brandon, the biggest problem that I saw when I was out there is that the people, it's like sort of like what Mr. Clark said, the different businesses have the ability to let somebody into their office or into their business if they want to. If they tell them you got to have a mask to come in and they don't comply, they don't let them in. The problem is when you have those people that become combative, and that's what you have to, once again, unfortunately, they call us, they call the police, or they call law enforcement. As far as working with other cities, that's up to the individual city, though, you know, the sheriff's office is the chief top or the chief law enforcement officer of the county. You can't go in and impose your will on different cities, because that'll cause a tension between not only the sheriff's office, but with the politicians in that area. The best thing to do is try to get everybody to work together. As far as the enforcement part, you got to be careful with that, because you start enforcing that and you're going to get people that resist. And at that point, now you got people going to get arrested for resisting with policemen. So it's a very fine line that you have to walk. Once again, my biggest issue, or my best concern, would be to work with the different chiefs and the different city officials, not just the police, to see if they can come up with a viable solution. And once again, you have to have compassion. Maybe somebody can't afford to get a mask. If they can't afford a mask or something, try to get it to them. And some people will wear it if they have it, but if they don't have it, then what can you do with it?
Thank you, Mr. Navarro. Sheriff Tony, you this pandemic has started under your watch. You've had to kind of, you know, learn on the fly, I imagine, as far as policing in a time of pandemic. Same to you as far as, you know, crime rates in a COVID-19 situation. Is there concern that they go up, working with municipalities? And then early on, I remember, you know, we even covered a few times that you had some of your deputies complaining that they weren't getting the proper PPE materials maybe that they needed. Can you update us on that and where we are there?
Sure. To begin with, as far as the increase in crimes, we had a spike in violent crimes. Mr. Clark was close to being correct. We had 7 total homicides, and they were related to these parties that we were seeing, people not in compliance with CDC recommendations, having 150 plus people at parties and these roving car clubs. And so we launched an operation to mitigate that and cut down. We've made a multitude of physical arrests, written hundreds of citations, and took a multitude of enforcement activities, and we're bringing that down. In terms of some of the challenges that we have seen, when we're talking about dealing with the unified effort amongst law enforcement, I'm in a very different position as a constitutional officer and sheriff of a county compared to a chief of police. The chiefs of police don't have the autonomy that I have to send specific marching orders to enforce certain activities in our cities, whether it be citations, business, etc., without having to consult their mayors. That is a reality. And they're having the issues of mayors are focused right now on ensuring that they don't impact businesses, that revenue streams aren't lost. And so they're more focused on providing more warnings versus stricter enforcement aspects. To unify that, I've had these conversations with our chiefs of police and ensuring that, look, we are going to have to take an aggressive stance on certain activities and work with code enforcement, both at the county level and city, in order to curb the spread and how many people are violating these things. You cannot ignore, and I know we use Hollywood for an example, so we'll stay there. You can't ignore the nexus between if Hollywood is not in compliance in terms of business regulations, code enforcement, then people who live in the northern part of the county are going to go to Hollywood. And we've seen that happen, whereas Miami has set forth some very hard or stern restrictions, and we've seen people migrate north to come party in parts of Broward County. And so what we have been doing both at the sheriff's office and the county level is to communicate not only just with our local municipals to be in a uniform setting, but also with the Tri-County area between West Palm Beach and Miami-Dade to ensure we don't have this shift or influx going either north or south.
Few extra seconds, Sheriff, just to update us on, as we talked about early on, some of your deputies complaining about PPE, or where are we there?
In terms of PPE, I'll be honest, coming into this organization again, this was something that my predecessor failed to recognize, and not to say that he should have predicted that a worldwide pandemic would occur, but absorbing command of this office, we had 4,096 high quality N95 masks in custody. This agency is 5,700 strong. So we were already behind. And so I had to reallocate funds out of the current budget, and we procured over $5 million worth of PPE gear. We're in excess of hundreds of thousands of items. And that is going to ensure that we can sustain the long-term level of providing services, regardless of how long this event continues to happen. So there should be zero concern as to whether or not we are prepared. In addition to that, the CARES funds has come in, and we are currently working with the county to build out the county's first strategical stockpile of personal protection equipment, because we can't rely on the state, nor should we ever rely on the federal government to do what's right for our residents here in Broward County.
Mr. Whatley, you are next. Whoever's in charge, come January, COVID-19 very well could still be with us. How would you run the department under a pandemic and ensure that you're working with other municipalities as well?
Well, basically, it's all about communication. So you got to work with the chiefs and all the other cities that aren't part of the Broward Sheriff's Office, and you got to set the same standard for everybody. Everybody has to have the same operational plan that they're going to stick to as a team, because what matters is the life of all the citizens of Broward County. It is the protection of life that is first. So it might be an inconvenience to some civilians, but you have to enforce the law. I understand about some restaurants and stuff, but you know what? I'd have people do spot checks and so forth and enforce the law, because it's not worth having somebody's parent or their child die because you didn't want to be a nuisance in their life. I'd rather be a nuisance temporarily so that they can live and have a productive life. And I want to touch base on what Tony said, that he didn't have he's now saying in the beginning he didn't have enough equipment. It wasn't a problem with him not having enough equipment, but he would go in interviews. You can check the news interviews of the past, February, March, and so forth. He would state, we have adequate equipment. We are prepared. We are doing this and we are doing that. And now he's saying, well, when I got to command, we only had 4,000 something, 900 something masks, and we didn't have enough equipment. Yet he was giving interviews saying we are properly prepared, but at the same time, he's getting emails from the deputies union, the jail union, the dispatchers union, and so forth saying, where is the equipment? So he's getting all these emails. People are crying for equipment, yet he's giving interviews on your channel, Channel 10, Channel 4, saying we are adequately prepared and we have dispersed the equipment. And this has always been my problem with Sheriff Tony. He is a pathological liar. And the problem is he's a very educated pathological liar. Thank you.
You know I'm going to have a rebuttal to that one.
You got your minute. You got your minute.
Okay. So
take it.
First of all, I don't want to continue to entertain some of this nonsense, but I will say this. There's something referenced a burn rate. A burn rate is a breakdown of what volume of equipment we need as first responders to continue to successfully respond to calls for services. So as our burn rate increases, and it's not just law enforcement, I have fire rescue as well. We are in excess of burning up thousands of PPE equipment. And so as we procured, we deployed, and we sent out. The reality of it is that we started deficient. It doesn't mean that we didn't deploy and didn't burn up money very fast. So this notion that Chuck wants to play ball and play games and create all this nonsense, it's not true. It's not factual. But I appreciate his gamesmanship. It's good sport.
Thank you,
Well,
Sheriff. Okay,
then all the employees of the Broward Sheriff's Office are lying, and
briefly.
Tony is the one person that is telling the truth. They all conspired: dispatch, jail, road patrol, criminal investigations, the upper echelon command. So what Tony is basically saying is the entire Broward Sheriff's Office, all components, have conspired to lie against him, and he is the only one that is telling the truth.
Sheriff,
Don't forget that he also handed out hand sanitizer with his name all over it.
Okay, guys, we're going to stick to the topics here. Sheriff, that was a singled out situation. 30 seconds and we're moving on. Mr. Pollock, you're next.
Brandon, it's not even worth the 30 seconds. Move on.
Mr. Pollock, the original question in this situation, we're talking about COVID-19, the very real likelihood that it's still very much a part of our lives come the beginning of this year. How you lead this department, how you work with municipalities to keep people safe, to keep crime low. What are your ideas?
One of the things that I would do, moving forward, come January, is just to make sure that we have enough PPE equipment stockpile, for the employees, to get us through, this epidemic, so that we can protect the public, when we respond. Also, you continuously communicate, with the chiefs of police and working with them to help them with their problem. If they have a problem, it's a Broward County problem. But you got to get everybody, together, because if you work one end of the county, that means that the other end is going to be vulnerable. So people in the county will just move around. So everybody, we all have to be on the same page, and we have to work together and we have to communicate. So I will initiate those conversations, moving forward. I won't wait for them. I'll go to them. Secondly, anytime you have something of this nature, that happened, with this pandemic, people are losing their jobs. Crime will go up. That's inevitable. I mean, we can sit here and say that it won't, but it will. People do not have jobs out here, and, to no fault of theirs. So crime is going to spike. We have to be more visible. We have to let people know that we're out there, to protect them, and be a little bit more proactive, not in terms of enforcement, but just be proactive with our visibility. Let them know that we are out here, and to be able to assist them and help them, in their time of needs.
Thank you, Mr. Pollock. And Mr. Jones, same question to you, sir.
Well, I've been listening to everybody talk, and not just here on the panel, but I've been listening to everybody in the region. Every politician, every government leader wants to have their own fiefdom. They want to say, look what I did. I provided this, I provided that. We can no longer be separate and divided during this pandemic. We must be able to talk to law enforcement, government officials in Palm Beach and Dade, and all the local municipalities. We must take away our egos and our personal agendas and get down to the real fact of the matter. The real fact of the matter is we got to protect and serve. And protecting and serving means more than locking people up, more than giving people citations for not putting a mask on. We need to come together as a total community and come up with a plan that's going to protect all the people of South Florida. And not only do we have to do it, we're going to need the input from the media. We're going to need the input from businesses, because everybody has something to lose in this other than their lives, although the lives are the most important entity and loss here, but we also have to think about the livelihoods. We have yet to talk about how do we open up our schools safely yet. That is a public issue, but we're allowing the school boards to make those decisions without everybody's input. So in this pandemic, It's going to affect all of us. But again, because we are the service providing entity, we're going to be out front, but we cannot be out front by ourselves. We need the input. Thus, bringing it to a real finite, we need to put away the bickering. We need to put away our personal soapboxes. We need to get together as leaders, learn from the past, lead in the present, and have a vision for the future. And that goes to all of the leaders. And as the sheriff of Broward County with the most influence in this county, the most power in this county, the most authority, my job is to facilitate that corporation, bringing those stakeholders to the table. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Mr. Smalling, and then we're going to have time for one more question before closing remarks. Mr. Smalling, policing in the pandemic and keeping those municipalities working together well, how do you do it?
Yeah, well, I think with this COVID-19 that we're dealing with, the first thing we got to take care of is our employees. You know, when this thing started, there was issues with the sheriff's office getting the proper equipment and things like that. And I think a large part of it dealt with not having communication between the unions and the sheriff's administration, which is important. And we still don't have that in the sheriff's office. So that's something that we need to overcome and move forward. You know, as far as the public, we've got to be safe ourselves before we can actually go out there and do our service to the public. And as you know, most of my opponents have stated already, you know, there has to be some kind of communication with the city government, with the municipalities, with the county. And I think they're attempting to do that. You know, I'll give credit where credit is due. I think, you know, Sheriff Tony did a good job with stopping those parties that were happening, because those are just incubators for this virus. So gatherings like that are something that we need to focus on. We also do need to focus on the crime rate, because as more and more people lose their jobs and don't have any other means of surviving, they're going to, you know, possibly turn to crime. So those are some of the things that we need to look at. But, you know, all in all, I think it starts at home. And when I say home, I mean the sheriff's office. We need to keep our employees safe, make sure that they're not transmitting this thing throughout the agency, so that we can effectively do our jobs.
Final question for the panel, guys, and then you'll all get a minute to make a closing statement here. But there's been talk of the creation of a civilian review board. So to me, that says, you know, including civilians in reviewing complaints that could come into the department about deputies or sergeants, such forth. Mr. Clark, back to you again at the top. What are your thoughts on the creation of that type of a board?
Brandon, one of my priorities in becoming a leader of BSO is full and real transparency. And I believe that in the past, there hasn't been full and complete transparency at BSO. So to do that, you can implement some civilians into the process. There's currently a review process for individuals that don't follow the proper policies and procedures. But having a complete and sole civilian review board, to me, doesn't make sense. I believe you need a subject matter expert on the review board to be able to answer questions, to be able to explain to the individuals on the board as to what happens real time. It's something that, you know, someone, just an ordinary citizen that's never had to make those split-second decisions, how can they possibly understand the training? How can they possibly understand what officers, deputies, first responders go through in those moments where, you know, it's, like I said, it's a split-second decision. There's no room for error. So you got to have transparency. And by having transparency, you can allow citizens to get into the process. But you also need those subject matter experts there to be able to help guide through the process. So, you know, there are things that need to be done, and we do need to continue to get better every day. But there's a process. But we also need to make sure that the men and women of the agency know that they themselves have due process, because that's what they're entitled to. That's what they should get, is due process, and let that process work out. And if in due process comes out and finds that they didn't violate any policies and procedures, then they're not reprimanded, they're not fired. then they're left on the agency. But you've got to make sure it's two things. You got to make sure the community understands what's going on and the men and women in the agency know what's going on. And you got to make sure that due process is followed. And you got to make sure you got to have transparency with the community. You shouldn't have to wait for the local news media to break a story about lack of transparency.
Mr. Navarro, your thoughts on a civilian review board under your leadership? How would that look?
Brandon, I've spoken on this subject several times, not only with I guess this is my second forum, but with other people too, and it's the same thing. I'm going to expand a little bit on what my colleague, Mr. Clark, there has said. And my philosophy is, once again, I'll say it, before you can judge me, walk in my shoes. Henceforth, these community things, okay, good, I agree, that's fine. But before you do that, come out and ride with the policemen, come out and ride with the firemen. Go to the dispatch center and listen to the dispatchers and see the abuse that they have, that they put up with. Go to the jail and see how these inmates, the prisoners, inmates, whatever you want to refer to them, do to the jail personnel inside the jail. There comes a point where, you know, we're all human beings. We can all tolerate up to a certain point. And like Mr. Clark said, the due process is very important. If you've got a panel that tells you that your employee, not just the deputy, but everybody, that any of your employees did not violate state statute, didn't violate departmental policy, did not violate standard operating procedures, that they did everything appropriately, to go and fire somebody just for the sole purpose of appeasing a community? No, I'm sorry, I don't agree with that. If you got them and they're giving you what the right decision to do, just because you want to go and elevate yourself, and you don't just go against them, and you don't put those people down. You know, you're affecting people's lives, and you got to realize that. And you can't just arbitrarily, even after you've been told, hey, nobody's done, the individual did nothing wrong, and you just go, well, you know what? I'm going to appease the community because I want to get elected, so I'm going to, you know, fire this person. And then on top of that, you before the due process, the criminal part or any part of it is over, you plaster on TV these people. You know what? You're actually obstructing justice. I think you're actually. How are you going to find a good jury to be able to make a decision?
Time's up, Mr. Navarro. I got to stop you there, Sheriff Tony.
All right, sorry, but thank you guys.
Civilian
Yeah,
review
sure.
board.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Brandon. Really quick. You know, before there was a George Floyd, we've been ahead of this in this organization in terms of excessive force and building more trust with this community. To begin with, we started an early warning system that allows us to track and monitor any type of behavior that would be indicative of someone violating policies, protocols. We also created the agency's first use of force review board, comprised of subject matter experts who are now capable of examining all use of force that occurs across the entire county in terms of our districts of responsibility. I also end up establishing a new membership inside a professional standards committee. Professional standards committee takes on the culture of the sheriff himself. And I've removed all those members. We select them. We've brought people in with better educational backgrounds and much more diversity. And then I appointed a judge to be the chairman of it. But in addition to that, we had to look at what the community was requesting. And so I sat down with the mayor, Mayor Honus, and we talked about the importance of how do you integrate a civilian review board in this community without getting into contractual issues with the unions from individual municipalities and or the sheriff's office. And so we are working with him in the county to build a civilian review board that will have the authorities to review every single use of force that occurs in this county, regardless if it's the sheriff's office or Fort Lauderdale, and provide recommendations for either policy changes or additional activities. That's the balancing point where we don't violate any type of procedural elements that exist, nor do we get into contractual issues with the unions, but the community still has its input. So those things are in place. We didn't wait for a murder. We didn't wait to see someone choked to death for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And to the point as to people being held accountable and being terminated. This office is very unique. Even with all the checks and balances that we put in place, at the end of the day, the final disciplinary action is presented as a recommendation to the sheriff. And therefore, the sheriff has the autonomy, the authority to make the final decision. And I won't hesitate to hold people accountable
One more
regardless of
chance
what
in closing
individual-
arguments. One more chance in closing arguments. Listen to me. Closing statements. But moving on to Mr. Whatley, a civilian review board. How do you feel about that if you're sheriff of Broward County?
Well, I have no problem with the civilian review board, but not quite like Tony has done it. You know, you can't put a bunch of civilians together that have no aspect of what law enforcement consists of, and then they decide whether they actually liked what the deputy did, and they did not like what the deputy did. A review board has to be thoroughly trained in the aspects of law governing things like Terry stop, Fourth Amendment, and so forth. Use of force. They have to understand use of force under the reasonableness theory, and the reasonableness theory under law is based on officer reasonableness, not civilian. So they have to be fully trained in all aspects of this, and they have to be exposed to, just like Navarro said, dispatch and so forth. But you don't put a group of political supporters and then they decide, no, we don't like that person. If you don't fire them, we will not support you in this upcoming election. That's what happened with Tony. So they have to be thoroughly trained, vetted, and then you can have one based on those guidelines. Because what happens is when you prematurely fire people, and it has happened in the past, the Broward Sheriff's Office spends hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars per year on senseless arbitration, and they end up getting their jobs back. That's what happens, and it comes out of the taxpayer's pocket.
30 seconds if you want it, Sheriff, before we go to Mr. Pollock, since you were mentioned there. Or
Yeah, sure. I'll talk a little bit more about the civilian review board
quickly,
and how that model is going to work out. The county is going to elect who's they're going to be choosing in terms of backgrounds, experiences. The discussions are there to have law enforcement experience. There's no ignorance to the fact that we want people to have enough experience to make very well, sounded decisions and not be emotional based. But that's up to the county to choose and select those parties, not me. Did we lose Brandon?
We lost our moderator.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Well, that happens every once in a while in the world of technology. So this is Dan Lindblade.
Welcome.
We left off, we were going to, Sheriff, were you going to finish your thought there, please?
Yeah, I closed it out, Dan. I said basically the civilian review board, the county is going to be responsible for selecting membership that's going to participate in it.
Okay, so let's, I think we're going to move to closing comments. Is that all right with you, gentlemen? And Brandon will come back. Mike, is that where we're at?
No, you still have 3 candidates need to answer that last question about the Citizen Review Board.
Okay, so let's finish with that. Citizen Review Board, who are the 3 that are remaining, please?
I'm up next. I'll go ahead and make it quick.
Mr. Pollock.
Yes, sir. I'll agree, with the Citizen, Review Board. As long as there's training in place, for the panelists, who will be serving on that board. And I also believe in due process, for the employees. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pollock. And who else has to?
I'm
Mr.
next.
Jones?
Dan, the best practices of the 21st century actually deals with police oversight and citizen review boards. It clearly states that the citizens who's going to sit on that board are recommended from the community leaders to sit on that board. It clearly states that they must endure and go through training to understand what police officers and law enforcement persons go through. It also clearly states that people that's with law enforcement backgrounds, lawyers, should not sit there because they tend to have a bias towards and to go along with the police. It also states that the Police Review Board has total, they can look at all of the information on all of the complaints, reference the investigation and what the charges are. They have subpoena power. They can listen to the tapes. They can view the tapes. This is what the best practices talk about, and including the community as part of it. If you have government officials handpicking, you still have the same problem that the community does not trust the outcome. And we're trying to get away from that, not allowing them to do that. One of the things the police can do, law enforcement can do, is can go in and change those antiquated, outdated, obsolete, redundant policies so everybody understands what the violation is, and it's not covered or recovered by an existing policy or one that's put in place. And that means the unions will not be fighting against your policies because they're at the table as well.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. And who else was remaining? Was it Mr. Smiley?
Yes, thank you, Dan. Civilian review boards are something that is, the public is asking for. And, as law enforcement officials, it's something that we definitely need to seriously consider. I think the devil is going to be in the details as we're finding out. Is it going to violate deputies' due rights, things like that, and who all is going to make up the Civilian Review Board. I was fortunate to work with the Professional Standards Committee at the Sheriff's Office, so I kind of know how it operates. And I think that in itself, internally for BSO, is a good device where we have civilians on board to review misconduct cases and things like that. So as far as countywide, again, it's something that the public wants, and I think it's something that we probably are going to end up going towards, but the devil is going to be in the detail.
Thank you, Mr. Smalling, very much. Let's see, we have Mr. Beyer back on cell phone. Brandon, are you ready to pick it up, or would you like me to continue? So he's trying to get on. I'm going to move to closing statements now. We'll be wrapping it up. We'll go in the same order that we had. You'll have the same time frame. Mike will have those for you. So Mr. Clark, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Brandon. Thank you to everyone who attended today. We talked a lot about policing today, but as I said in my opening, BSO is so much more than just the law enforcement aspect. In fact, only 22% of the budget of BSO goes to the actual law enforcement aspect. I'm here to make sure a couple of things. A, I'm going to promise to the community that I'm going to look at that budget to make sure that the money is spent in the right way. It's allocated in the right way to make sure all of Broward County is safe. I'm also going to promise and make sure that I take politics out of BSO. Safety is nonpartisan. Whether you drive home today or you leave your house today, if you get pulled over by someone, you shouldn't be asked if you're a Republican or Democrat. It's time to get politics out of BSO. I want to work with the leaders in the community and the business leaders in the community to make Broward County safer and better for everyone. This election is too important to go with the folks that have been a part of the problem for years. It's time to adjust the way BSO is run, and it's trying to run it more efficiently and effectively and encompass the local business leaders and community leaders. Thank you for your time, and thanks, everyone. I appreciate it. Thank you to all the other candidates for appearing.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Brandon, can you hear me, and are you able to take over? We're on final remarks. You're on mute, Brandon.
Better there. Sorry, guys, about that. I'm not sure what happened there, but it looks like
we're at Mr. Navarro on closing remarks.
Okay, Mr. Navarro, you're next.
My reason for running for sheriff is that being a boots on the ground candidate, I have firsthand knowledge of the problems that the agency has and is experiencing. I will not surround myself with yes individuals or wear rose-colored glasses. I would like to thank the Fort Lauderdale Chamber of Commerce for the opportunity to present my views and objectives to the community. As sheriff, I will bring positive change so that every employee of the agency will feel that they are backed. I will also make sure that the community trusts us. Oh, which one was it? 30 or I'm up?
30.
Okay.
Halfway there.
All right. I want to bring trust. I want to make sure that the community not only trusts the police, they trust their firemen, that they trust their corrections individuals, that they trust their dispatchers, that they trust their CPAs, that they trust the janitor that's working in the office. Everybody. We're not just one. So thank you, everybody. Thanks again. This is my second forum with you guys, and thanks for taking it easy on me.
Sheriff Tony, you're next for closing remarks, sir.
Yes, thanks again for allowing me to come participate today. You know, roughly 19 months ago, I came to the organization, ended up promoting the most diverse command staff in over 105 years. We are now comprised of roughly 500 years of institutional knowledge and experience, also for the first time leading this organization up. As a byproduct of that move, we have taken this agency to being one of the worst active shooter prepared to the best. We've reallocated $1 million to build a real-time crime center, state-of-the-art training center. The men and women of this organization receive the best raise they've gotten in 25 years. And we are very much aware and sensitive to the cultural changes that are being called for police reform. In fact, we are ahead. If the community is examining the things that this administration has done, they will recognize that I'm not here to give you promises. I'm the only candidate that can speak about performances. And if we want to continue to move this organization forward, along with this county, then I'm hoping that I receive their votes on August 18th. And I thank you all again for your time.
Thank you, Sheriff. Mr. Whatley, your closing remarks, please.
Yeah, I want to thank everybody for watching this forum this morning, and thank you for inviting me to participate. I'm not in the primary. I am an NPA, which means there is no partisan politics with me running for sheriff. That means I'm here for the Republicans, the Democrats, and the independents, all the people of Broward County. The reason why I'm running is because there's been 30 years of political corruption. Tony is known for being a pathological liar while working at the Broward Sheriff's Office, and he's falsified documents. This has been proven. He's under investigation by the FDLE. And then you have the events with Alvin Pollock. Says he climbed through the ranks, but he did not. He's never a sergeant, lieutenant, or captain. He became colonel based on helping with politics. So I'm going to bring truth. With truth, you build trust, and the employees will trust you, and they'll perform better. That's why I'm running for Broward County Sheriff. Thank you.
Mr. Pollock, you're next, sir.
Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Dan. First of all, I'm the only Democrat, with the plan. My plan is to make our schools safer, stop animal abuse, also increase public safety. I will also work with the business community and the leaders. I will bring about a business advisory board, and I will address their issues and their concerns, for all of Broward County. I want to be your sheriff because Broward County deserves better. Broward County needs to be better. In this 21st century of law enforcement, we can do a much better job. And that's what I will bring to the Broward Sheriff's Office. I will bring you an agency that you will be proud of, an agency that when you dial 911, that you're going to get your best out of the men and women that work there. And I just want to thank everyone, for participating, this morning. Please vote for me, August 18th. Thank you so much.
Mr. Jones, closing remarks to you, sir.
We have, good morning again. We have listened. You have listened to all the candidates that's on this panel. It's your time to make a decision. It's your time as a voter to select the leader that you need and you want that will take us from the old 20th century processes, policies, and training and bring us to the 21st century best practices. Our main goal here, my main goal here, is to protect and serve. Make Broward County safer than it was yesterday. Make our communities safe. Make our children safer. But to unify our community, we must put in place the best hiring practices, the best training practices. We must put in the best fiscal responsibility practices. We must bring in the best leadership. We must bring in community partnerships. We must remember that we just don't hire and elect a resume. Ethics, character, moral issue has to be above reproach. That's why I'm running. Remember, Willie Jones2020, unity equals
Jones. Mr. Smalling, you'll take us out, sir.
All right, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure being here. Thank you to the Fort Lauderdale Chamber. Thank you to you, Brandon, for moderating, and to my colleagues. My name is Andrew Smalling. Once again, I am a qualified candidate. If you visit my website, smallingforsheriff.com, you'll learn a little more about my platform and what I've done in the past. As far as the sheriff's office, it all starts at the top. You have to have a leader that is effective, a leader that is responsible, and a leader that's accountable. And it starts with the character of that individual person. We can put all our best faces on here, but true character is what we've done in the past, what's brought us up to where we are now. And if you look at my resume, if you look at what I've done in Lauderdale with the Broward Sheriff's Office, you'll see that I have good character. I've been a good leader, and I can take this agency where it needs to go. So once again, please vote August 18th, Smalling for sheriff. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smalling. And you mentioned it there, the primary election is August 18th. Early voting, though, starts in just a few days. That begins on August 8th. Thanks, guys, for letting me be a part of this. Mr. Lindales, I'll toss it back to you. Thanks for your patience. Wouldn't be TV without a technical difficulty, right? Leave it to the TV guy to be the one that brings that to the party. So
There you go, Brandon. Thank you so much. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. I want to remind everyone on the webinar here today that this is brought to you by the Greater Fort Lauderdale Chamber, the Deerfield Beach Chamber, Tamarac North Lauderdale Chamber, and the Pompano Beach Chambers of Commerce. Again, thank you all for being here. And one last thing, not only voting, but also remember, it's so important that everybody fills out the census. We're way behind on folks filling out the census, so please fill out those census forms. We need Broward. We need all the cities to show up. Let's do that together.
Oh, and I just want to note that I'm not in the primary, so I'm only in the general.
yes,
you made that. Thank you for that. Again, Brandon, thank you. Thanks, everybody. We are adjourned.